All right. Hello. Welcome back for another week of Humble Devs and continuing our road to building a SaaS, on which we will start very shortly. I promise you that. But before getting there, we had to cover some basics, which we've been doing for the past 3 weeks, and we will continue this week until we reach a point that we are good in terms of basics, and then we'll start implementing things, building our app, as well as utilizing more and more AI powers in order to get our application up and running. All right. Okay. Sorry, just checking my audio level just to make sure that everything is okay. And moving on. All right. So, as usual, we will be starting with some recap for last week's topics before we start diving into this week's information, just to help you remember everything that we're covering and revise it a bit. All right. So let's start. We won't be spending too much time on the review, as we really want to get to diving into using all of the information that we've covered. So just very briefly, last week we discussed the variables for CSS, which is going to be the primary way of creating consistency. So at the start of the project, you can define all of the colors, your size of your fonts, and all of these kind of things before you even start building, so that when you are building, you already have all of these defined and they can be used in your build, right? We also covered the frameworks for CSS. So these are generally libraries that will allow you to use pre-created components in your application, speeding up your development. And we covered the three different sorts of frameworks that you will find. Again, these are not like very defined, so this is kind of a loose definition for these, but this is these are the buckets in which they fall eventually. We also covered a couple of the popular ones, like Bootstrap, like Material UI, like Tailwind CSS, which is, I would guess, the most popular at the moment. We have something like Bulma.io, which sits somewhere in the middle. And then we have completely new kinds of CSS in JS frameworks that cater more for modern frameworks like React. All right. So JavaScript is, of course, the engine, all of the movement, all of the actual functionality of your application, right? As we already covered. JavaScript, again, not related to Java, the programming language. In JavaScript was primarily made for web development and web browsers, although nowadays it does much more than that, which we will also be discovering very, very shortly as we will start to build our tech stack. And we will also start diving into building the backend, which we'll also be doing using JavaScript, which is something that wasn't common some years ago. All right. So linking JavaScript, again, very similar to linking CSS to your HTML. However, with JavaScript, there are two ways of linking your scripts. One is adding these to your header, and this is something that you would normally do if the script is required to be there in terms of functionality for your app. So it's not a functionality that needs to be loaded and ready as soon as the page is there. And this is more for like page critical functionality or tracking or these kind of things. But also you can add your scripts to the end of the body. so they can get loaded after all of the content of HTML, CSS are loaded. So basically your application is fully loaded and visible before the scripts are read and executed. All right. And these are scripts that are generally interacting with your page. So there is no need to load them before your page is available to the user. But after the page has already been loaded, and then after the user will interact with them, most probably they will already be loaded and ready to go. All right. Okay, so let's go through these. We discussed that we have variables, and variables are little buckets of information that we define at various times during our application, right? The old way of declaring your variables is using the var keyword, which you should not be using at the moment. So you can, of course, but the problem with var is that this variable is available everywhere in your code base, where let and const are considered the modern ways of defining your variables, which are only available within a code block. They can also be more global, of course, if that's where you declare them. So generally, we will only be using let and const in our projects. We also discussed some data types. So most of the common data types like strings, numbers, and booleans we already went through, and we'll use these extensively as we build our project. So there is no need to rehash all of that here, as we already spent a considerable amount of time doing that last week. We also went through all of the operators. So you have arithmetic operators as well as assignment operators to add something to a string, to subtract something from a string or a number. The comparative operators that we use mostly within if and else if statements. And we have also some logic in there as well that we'll be using in our project for sure. So control flow is very, very important. We covered last week how to use the if, and else blocks, as well as showed the switch statement, which is better and easier to use if you're comparing many different aspects for the same input. We briefly looked into loops, and for arrays, we'll be doing a bit more of that this week, because this is quite a complex topic, and it's quite important for you guys to understand how this works, what are the options there that are available to you, but also mostly when AI is going to be writing all of this for you, so that when you see the things that it will write, that it makes sense to you, that you understand it, and that you can also direct it if it's creating something that you preferably don't want. Or something that might be even a bottleneck for your application in the future. All right, we looked a bit into functions. So functions are usable bits of code. So you want something to be done regularly, you create a function for it. And then whenever you need that functionality, you just call upon the function, give it an argument as the input for that function, and then have the function be executed. So yeah, we'll also be using these this week, so we'll be covering that for sure in the next 2 hours. Moving on, we spoke about DOM manipulation, so this is something that we'll be doing much more of this week. So the DOM manipulation is basically the document object model that we interact with, which is the page. So when we talk about the DOM, that is basically the entire page. And that is comprised out of HTML elements, and we interact with these in different ways by enabling them, disabling them, changing them, inputting new text, removing text, changing text, changing CSS, changing CSS classes, adding these, removing them, and all these kind of things. So this is why JavaScript is the enabler for interactivity with pages in general. And we might also be looking at some maybe popular applications that are all based on browser and web browser technology that might not be very evident to start with. All right. We spoke about event handling. So basically, whenever a user clicks on something, so we we can track that, right? So that we tell the browser that, okay, if a user clicks on this button, we want something to happen. If a user hovers over something, we want something to happen. If a user stops hovering over an item, we want something else to happen. And this is something that is of course very key and has a very what's the word I'm looking for? Is a primary means for us to interact with the DOM and to uh, exert control over it, right? So, having very quickly kind of ran through last week's topics, let's jump into this week's topics. I don't have too many slides for this week because I want to spend most of the time in the code editor, in the browser, looking at different functionalities, using these so that you guys better understand how to use all of the different aspects of JavaScript, as well as how this translates to actually, building something. Because at the end of the day, uh, the power that is given to us nowadays with the power of AI is that we can build something very, very quickly, even as a beginner, even with the basics that we've covered in the last 3 weeks and today. You should be able to build a functional app, albeit mostly just front end, like front end logic. But that should be perfectly possible. And then once we start diving into handling the backend and building the backend, we will then really have all of the bases covered for building our application. All right. Let's get moving. Okay. All right. So for this week, we're going to look into a bit of a more advanced, some more advanced topics of JavaScript, right? So talking more about DOM manipulation, handling complex data, how to deal with operations that take time to perform, because that's something that's going to be very common in any kind of web app that we'll be building, as well as fetching data from the internet or any kind of source that's available online. Starting with the DOM manipulation in general, right? So we'll be doing a whole lot of that here. However, why is that so powerful? As you would have seen that when we started building um, our like first page. Let me. I'm just going to switch views so that I can go to my other browser window. And if we, for example, go to this page, again, not something great, but we kind of put a whole bunch of things in here. All of this was static, right? So all of this is HTML that we kind of put together. But we can't like change that on the fly. The page exists, right? The user, when they're here, they can't press a button and then something changes on the page. The easiest example that I can give of that is when you go to a modern web, web page, you can toggle light mode and dark mode, right? And the difference between light mode and dark mode is basically a CSS class that needs to change, right? That defines the colors for everything that you see. Having a toggle is not a problem in HTML, but actually changing the CSS classes inside of an HTML page, that's something where we need JavaScript, right? So JavaScript then comes in and is going to be like, okay, you have something. So the example that I have here precisely is, okay, we have a list of products, right? Which is in HTML, we just have an unordered list. Then we have a list of products, right? And then there's a button for a user to add a product. Logically speaking, there needs to be some kind of information that we need to pass around. So there we have event listeners. So we have an event listener. So we're like, okay, we're going to add an event listener to the button. And this is the button that we're kind of targeting, right? So we're saying, okay, we're creating a constant. This is a variable. In the variable, we're giving it a name, and that variable has the value of whatever the button is, right? So we're saying, okay, again, like document, this is a browser function. We're saying, okay, document for the DOM dot a function of the document object, and we're like, okay, we want to get an element by ID. And the ID is the thing that we see here in HTML. So in HTML, we have that ID defined for this unordered list. We're like, okay, we're creating a variable that's a constant, right? So this variable doesn't change in value. So it's always going to be equal to this button. And then we're saying, okay, this variable, we want to add an event listener to it. And the event we're listening to is a click. So when someone clicks on that, right? So here we're adding an event listener. We're creating a new variable, which is called new item. And the new item is a list item. So basically we're saying that, okay, inside of this event, so when this event happens, right? So when a user clicks, we want all of these things to happen. And firstly, we want to create a new list item, right? So this will be added. Then we're going to be adding some text, right? So we have the new item, which is the list item that we added, right? So to that new item, we're adding some text, so text content. And this is going to be, for now, just something static in here, your product. And then we'll be like, okay, this means that the product list, which is also a variable that we have available here, that is basically the whole list, all right? Will be appended by one. So we're adding one to the product list, and then we're saying, okay, we're appending a child. And this is how we can make it so that whenever someone will press this button, we basically add a new list item to the product list, right? And we can also do this based on some delegation, so that we can look at a parent item, and we're like, okay, we want to add childs to that in the same similar way. All right. So this is just a given example. You don't need to, most probably you won't be writing this from scratch on your own anyway, but it's important to understand how this all comes together and the logic behind it, right? Because you have to be, at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're giving instructions, and these instructions need to be very precise. So we need to think about each step and each thing that needs to happen, because at the end of the day, even when we're using AI, it will create a lot of code that isn't complete, that overlooks certain aspects of the functionality that we want. So it's always very important for us to look very critically at whatever it creates, and whether this actually fulfills the need that we have at the end of the day, right? So again, this is kind of everything that I've explained. Just providing a bit of a bigger image for reference if you want to read through it. Again, we'll be working with the DOM model in a bit, so I don't want to spend too much time in the slides covering that. And then we have arrays. And an array is very, very simple. So if I would go to JavaScript, and an array is really nothing more than, so I'm just gonna, normally you would always create an array as a const. It's just a general rule within JavaScript. My new array, and yeah, okay, it's very helpful, the autocomplete, but it's also sometimes very annoying. So an array is nothing more than you start with the square brackets, right? So you open it and you close it, and every array object, or every array entry, right? So these are called members, right? So these are array members, if we want to use a technical term. So each member of the array has an index, and the indexes, they start at 0, as we mentioned last week. So this is index 0, this is index 1, this is index 2, right? And the array can be very large. You also, for general readability, you can, and most probably you will write your arrays in this kind of fashion. So you'll have each array member be on a new line, and then the end of your array will be on a new line at the end, right? Just to easily be able to see where the array starts and where it ends. It's also inside the code editor, you can also very easily close them. And then you can see that, okay, there's an array here. This is where it starts. The 3 dots just indicate that something is hidden here. And here's where it ends, right? And it shows you like, okay, it's jumping a couple of lines, right? Now the array, also maybe something important to note that the separation of the members is by comma. And you don't need a comma for the last one. So the last member doesn't need a comma because there is no member coming after it because you are immediately closing the array. But the array itself within JavaScript isn't considered like a list, so to speak, like it is in other languages. It is still considered an object. And the reason for that is that arrays can also have objects inside of them. They can actually hold various data types. And the array itself has methods that we can use to interact with that array. And these are a number of them. We'll cover a few of them in a bit. But as mentioned, we have an array. The array is the members of the array are identified by index, so by number, which starts at 0. So if we have an array of cars or car brands, car 0 will be, okay. A weird example to give. So I maybe I wasn't thinking clearly when I wrote this, but when we're saying car 0, so this is a you could add this, or you're stating here that, okay, car 0 is going to be Opel, which is fine, but it's using the wrong array name. Anyway, we'll get to that in the code editor in a bit. I was confusing myself there. So as mentioned, an array can have objects inside of it. So if we look at this array here, so a const, we have an array which is called car models, and we're opening the array here and closing it there, right? However, inside of the array, we are using objects, and an object has a key value pair system. So unlike an array that uses indexes, so for 0, 1, 2, to define which array member you're targeting or that you're trying to look for or change or extract or remove or add something maybe in between. Objects, which we'll cover in a bit, are ordered by name. So if we're looking at the object, so we have now an array, and inside of an array, we have an object. So if we're looking at the name, for example, it will give us sedan here. And if we're looking at the price, or we're like trying to find the price, it will give us the value for it, right? So just wanted you to see that inside of an array, you can have objects, right? And the objects themselves are comprised out of multiple key value pairs. The same system here, so every new value has to have a comma at the end, and then the last one doesn't need it. But the methods for an array are there for us. There are plenty, like listed here, but we just need to know that they exist and what they do on a relatively basic level or high level. And then when we interact with the AI models, they will generally guide you into how best to utilize them. So we're going to cover a few that are generally very often used, like map. So if we are trying to interact with this table, this array, right? And we just want to gather all of the names of the car models, right? So we're creating a new array, right? So we're saying, okay, we're creating a const that's just called names, and it is equal to car models. So it is equal to this array dot map, which is a method, right? So because this is an array, we can use the map method on it. And the car, right? So this, so the method takes an argument. In this case, it doesn't matter what this car is. So this car can also be something else. Generally, it's value by default, but we can just call it index. We can call it item. You can call it whatever you want. It's just called car here because it's relevant to the name of the table. And then we're like, okay, remember this is an arrow function, right? So we're like, okay, for each thing that we're passing, right? So the map will basically run through all of the members of the array. And we're like, okay, for each member of the array, we want to get the car, which is again, this comes from this. This is what we've named each object or each member that we're passing through it, dot name, which is found here, right? So we're like, okay, the array car models for each member of the array, what we want is the name, right? So car.name, and then it will create a new array for us. So when we're using the map method, we're creating a new array that takes some data out of the old array as we've specified. So we're creating a new array that's called names, and it will have only the names in it, right? Nothing else. And then we have filter. So filter is basically, we're again running through the entire array. However, when we are filtering, we're filtering based on some kind of value. In this case, it's a Boolean. So we're saying, okay, we're creating a new array. We're using the filter method. So again, we're taking in the same array. We're using the filter method. And we're like, for each car, we want to only pass it basically if car.electric. And this will basically try to evaluate for true. So this is implicit. So when we're trying to search for, or when we're passing all of these values in, if we're saying that, okay, we want car.electric, that means we want for it to be true, right? So it will only give us an array with two outputs at the moment, because we have this one is true for electric and this one is true for electric, and for all of the ones that are false, it will just leave them behind, right? And then we have reduce, and reduce is used for summarizing, so creating a sum out of some kind of data in your array. And in this case, we're using it to summarize the total value, right? So we're like, okay, we have, again, the same array. We're using the method reduce, and the reduce has the sum kind of by default. So it creates the sum. That's why it's the reduce function. And then we're passing it. So basically each value, each car, each member of the array. And then again, an arrow function, we're like, okay, this has a bit of a different structure. Again, you don't have to remember this very precisely as long as you know what the reduce function does. You can always look it up how it works. So we want to have the sum, right? And this will basically be a combination of all of the cars.price. So again, this will run through the entire array. And we're starting at 0. So that is where we'll start counting, because we might want to basically be adding this value to an existing value to where this 0 will maybe be a variable that we're entering as the starting value. And this is then the result, right? So this will be the result of the sum. You can also do a bit of array destructuring. It's a bit of a kind of advanced topic. So I just want to kind of highlight that there is this kind of functionality that we will cover a bit later on. So for now, just know that you can name your array members to give them a name instead of an index. But this will also change how the array works, because in the background, the array will be changed into an object, which is generally not really something that you would be doing. But I want you to be aware of the fact that array destructuring exists, because AI might use that. And it could cause problems. So in general, you would want to avoid it. So you would preferably create an array or multiple arrays out of a complex array that houses the information that you want to take action on, instead of destructuring it and kind of changing the way that the array works in general, right? Okay. Moving on, sorry, just checking my audio in between, just making sure that everything is still running. Okay, cool. Yeah, seems to be okay. And then we're moving on to objects. So again, arrays are, it's a large bucket of data that can hold multiple kinds of data, and the members are identified by index, right? Starting at 0. Objects are key value pairs, right? So an object is comprised out of key value pairs, and you refer to the members by name instead of by index, right? However, there is a bit more to it, because an object can have functionality as well in something that's called a method, which is a function that is built inside of an object. So what is an object? An object, very similar to an array, you define it as a constant, you give it a name, it starts with a curly brace instead of the brackets, right? And then, because again, it's key value pairs, so here the key is the make, and the value is, in this case, Toyota, right? And this is called an attribute. So this key value pair is an attribute of my car. And I can get that information out of my car just by saying, okay, I want to get my car dot make. And because I'm looking for the make, right, which is the key, I will get the value as a result. So when I'm looking for my car dot make, I will get Toyota as the output result. The same goes for the model, right? Year. But a key, right, can also have an array as a value. So in here, I have features for my car. And these features, I can have them as like a string, but then I can't interact with them separately. So if I want to list all of the features that my car has, I can do that. And listing the features will basically give me an array in return. So it will tell me, okay, your car has all of these features. So these can be like 30 or 50 items. And then I can also say that, okay, I want my car and I want features. And I want, for example, feature index 0, and it will only give me Bluetooth in this instance, right? But also this will allow me to add things to it and remove things from it as well, which we'll cover later. And then we get to the method. So if you have a function that is inside an object, it's called a method. So that's why the objects have their attributes and have their methods. So here, the method is still a function. So when you call upon it, right, it will do whatever the function is designed to do, right? So in here, well, okay. If we call upon mycar.start, right, which is a function, the function is defined here, and what it does is console logs. Again, it's going to log something out of the console, and note that the backticks here, so just above my mouse pointer, indicate that this entire part is a string. However, inside of the string, there are variables. And when you add variables, with a $sign and curly braces surrounding the variable. This is called using the template literal. So you're injecting a variable inside of a string. And this is something that the browser will recognize, and it will then also get the values of these variables and insert them into the string, right? And it's very important for you to understand this is referring to the object in which this is being called, right? So this function exists within this object. So while inside of the object, if we want to refer to attributes or functions of this object itself, we use the keyword this, right? So we're saying that, okay, if we would call upon the function mycar.start, the function will say, will have the make, right? So this will be Toyota model. This will be Camry started. This would be the output. So if we go here and we call it, right? So we say, okay, mycar.start, and because it's a function, we always have to add the brackets. But we're not passing it an argument, right? So we're just calling upon the function. We're not saying it, we're not telling it, okay, we're giving you an argument of something that we're inserting. We're just calling the function. The output is going to be this. Objects can also be manipulated in their data type. So that just like when we have, for example, this features array, you can turn any part of an object into a string if you want to use it somewhere else. So if you're taking a part of an object and you want to insert it into like a different piece of data or into a different array or just display to a user, you generally would want to convert whatever value it is into a string. And this is normally done by JSON.stringify. And then you're like, okay, I want my car, so I want the entire object to become a string. And this will then be presented as a string as an output. So none of it will be seen as an object by the browser anymore. And this is done for safety, just so that you can't manipulate that information after that is being given to you. Yeah, so I do want to also highlight at this point that when I'm talking about an object within JavaScript, right? The object itself and its annotation is referred to as JavaScript object notation. And why is that so important? Is because, so it's JSON for short, that's what it stands for. So JSON is JavaScript object notation, has become universally used. So even outside of just web development, all web communication, or I mean, I wouldn't say all, because there are other forms of like communicating data to other systems. Most of the data, data like delivery, whether it is sending data to a different system or getting data from a system, is done using the JSON notation, or like the JavaScript object notation, right? So this is something that you'll be interacting with a lot. And it's, again, nothing more than just an object that has a name, starts with a curly brace, ends with a curly brace, and has a whole bunch of key value pairs in them, maybe arrays, maybe methods, but can be also a lot of them. And I want to give you a very brief example of that. And this is why I have Reddit open, because if we are looking at any page within on Reddit, right? So this page here is for front-end development, or the subreddit, and we see that we have a whole bunch of discussions in here, right? If I come here into the title bar and I just remove the / and the page itself, I just say I want the JSON of it, I will get the JSON of that page that I was looking at, right? So here we can see that, actually, let me just go back to it because it refreshed when I got a new JSON. So let's go back to the page just so that you can see what we're actually looking at. So the first thread here, right, is talking about optimizing a server-side J6, right? So if we go back to the JSON notation, dot JSON, and we make the print pretty, otherwise there is no spacing. And you can see that there is kind of a starting of the object here. But then we have the children. So this is a page and it has a lot of children, and the children are an array. But then immediately we start with an object, and that object has a kind. So this is the kind of thread that it is. Then we have the data. The subreddit is of course this. And then when we get to the self text, so basically to the description of what it is, we'll also see that we have a title. This is the title that we were looking at in the browser. And you all have to understand that this is the information that the page that you get when you load that page. So if you look at it outside of this JSON view, a part of that data outside of like the HTML and outside of the CSS styling and all that kind of stuff, there is this JSON object that you're receiving as well. And this is all of the information that is being displayed in the page. And the page itself uses JavaScript to take parts of this, because you're not seeing all of this, of course, inside of the page itself. So it's taking, whenever it's showing you the title, it's getting the, whatever that array is called, and then it's going into the children, and out of the children, it's taking a specific one, or actually it's running through all of them, and then taking the title, taking, a little bit of the body. And if you scroll through this, you will see, many different like subreddits with their titles and with all of their information. And this is something that Reddit makes available. So you can just say, oh, I want to see the JSON of this. It doesn't mean that all websites will do that, right? In contrary, most websites don't allow you to just call upon the JSON in this kind of view, just because there is no way for you to tell the service that this is what you want to see, right? So again, if we go back to the page, so this is how you're viewing it normally. And while the page is being loaded, there is logic in the background that, for showing you which user it is, it's getting the user information, getting the time and date to show you when this was posted, getting the title, getting a little bit of the body, getting all of these buttons and their values, right? And making sure that all of these are loaded whenever you are loading the page and putting all of that information in place. So again, this is why it's important to understand the JSON notation, the object notation, how it works, because that's how you will mostly be interacting with data coming to you, or data that you're sending somewhere else, right? Okay. Now I don't know if I lost you guys or if you're still following. Is this clear? At least clear enough to the point that you're like, okay, I understand this and this is not a problem for me. If you have any specific questions about it, drop it in the chat. Otherwise, we'll continue and we'll play around with it as we get there. All right. Now, continuing with an important topic. Which is, yeah. So whenever you're asking JavaScript to perform any kind of functionality, right? So this is So whenever you're asking JavaScript to perform any kind of functionality, that functionality might take time. So if, for example, just like the Reddit example that we were just looking at, if I want to embed a thread of Reddit, like a specific thread of a channel that I created in my app, right? So I want to show, for example, the last 5 posts. While someone is loading my page, that might take a second or two for my application to reach out to Reddit to call upon that information and filter it appropriately before giving me the value that I'm looking for. There are 2 ways that I can do that. So I can, in the script, just say that, okay, go get me that information, right? And this is what you'll be doing here. So when you're fetching data, so you're like, okay, I want you to go out and get me some information, right? While it's doing that, it won't be doing anything else because JavaScript as a language is considered single-threaded, which is where the blocking and non-blocking components come in. When something is single-threaded, that means it only does one thing at a time, right? We're only talking about the language here. So using JavaScript in itself doesn't mean that you can only do one thing at a time, which is the second part. But if we're just fetching data, so in the script somewhere, so I have a script of 500 lines, and somewhere I'm like, okay, get me that information. And the server that I'm reaching out to takes 5 seconds to respond, 30 seconds to respond. All of that time, this process is basically just waiting. So it sends out the request to whatever URL that we've specified, right? It will wait until the response is received from that server or service or application, right? If this is something that I'm doing at the moment of someone clicking a button or loading the page, if this takes, let's say, 5 seconds, for those 5 seconds, nothing will happen on that page, right? If it's happening when the user clicks a button, they'll be basically waiting for 5 seconds for something to happen, right? And this is why we don't just fetch data that has to come from somewhere outside of our application, but we use an async function, which is an asynchronous function, which means that when we use async await for short, we hand over the waiting part to the browser, and then JavaScript can continue to execute its code and not wait for that return, right? So if we're just fetching information, we're just waiting for something to arrive, and when it does, we're continuing, right? But if we're like, okay, we are calling upon an asynchronous function, so that means the browser understands, okay, we want to request some information here, and it starts with a try. So we're going to try something, and it's the same syntax as here. So we're creating, we're basically sending a request. We're awaiting fetching of data. We are doing something with that information, so we're parsing it. And at some point, we're going to, again, we're like console logging everything to the console now, but generally you would be inputting this into some kind of field, right? So you would interact with some kind of DOM object, right? And be entering that information. For now, we're just printing out things. And then if that doesn't work, so we've sent a request to this address and it denied our request. So the server is down, or it took too long to respond, or we don't have permission to request it, anything of that nature, there will be an error. And when the error is returned, so either we get a response, which is then a valid response, so we're good to continue. Otherwise, if there is an error, we then do something with the error. So for now, we're like, okay, we're just going to output the console that we could not get that information. And optionally, we can say, finally, we can do something else. We don't have to do this. So finally will always work, but generally you don't see this. So you would use finally only if there is something that you want to do, if this is successful or not, because it really doesn't matter. But generally, finally, it isn't being used in like building your app, just because there is little value to it unless you want to console log every kind of request that you're making, right? So this is a function, and at the end of the function, we're just calling it. So this just establishes the function, and here we're actually saying that, okay, we want this function to run. We're calling the function, right? And yeah, so if it's successful, it's say, okay, fetch data. We're calling. This is a fun little API. So there is it's a Poke API. So it can give you all of the different Pokemon information. So in here, so this very specific object that we called. So we're calling in a specific address. So we're like, okay, we're fetching information from this very specific API endpoint. And it's basically returning this entire object, right? Remember, JSON object. But all that we're interested in is the name. So all that we are actually outputting whenever we're receiving this is the name itself of the object. And this is the result. So like, okay, whatever information we are getting, we want to parse the JSON, and out of the JSON, we want to take data.name. And that's then what it gives us. And our finally logs to the console that the operation was completed. And just to also make it very, very clear, because I am talking about APIs, and this is something that we will also use very frequently while building our application. An API is basically a communication method that a backend provides us to get information from it. So here, this is very simple. It's an address, just like any web address is. And then you have a path that can give you a response. And in here, we're specifying a very specific path. Okay, we're like, okay, we're calling this API address. And we are looking for specifically a very specific Pokemon with this name. And it will give us that Pokemon's object, right? And APIs are used for a variety of different purposes. This is an API that is fully open, so it does not require any authentication for us to get any information out of it. There are plenty, so you can have one for weather, for example. If you want to embed weather in your app, you can call upon a free and open source and publicly available weather API, and then call the API. The API will give you a JSON based on the information that you're looking for, the location, the city, and then you can then take information out of that JSON that you want to display, and then just display that and leave everything else that you're receiving. All right. Moving on. And this is then we're then moving on to something that's very important, because we spoke, of course, about errors, right? As we were like in here, okay, we're fetching information, we might receive an error. But dealing with errors or handling these errors is very, very important to make sure that you yourself and your users have a good experience. And if something does go wrong, that you know and that your user knows as well, right? Because if there's a button for a user to do something and that button ends up not doing anything, then that's not a great user experience for your user to not know that something didn't happen, right? So handling errors is going to be very, very important in building and validating our application. This is something that we'll be adding also like a lot of fail safes for as we continue with building our app. Because at the end of the day, this is a very, very brief example. So we have a function that just divides two numbers. We're also preventing a user from entering a 0 because we don't divide by 0, right? So by default, we're giving the user this error, right? So if the user does enter a 0, we're like, okay, division by 0 is not allowed, right? And then we again, we're trying to run a function, and if an error occurs, we can then display an error message so that we can handle this information. What happens when an error occurs will highly depend on where that error happens, right? So if you're trying to interact with a database and the database did not respond in time, or it didn't give you a value, like a valid input, then that's something that you have to output, but most probably you also have to let the user know, so the front end, but also log something for yourself in the back end so that you can look at what actually happened when that user was trying to get information out to the database. And this is something that we'll cover when we continue as well. The most common errors that you'll be dealing with are either you receive something that isn't in the format or kind of data type that you expected it to, or you're calling upon a function, or you're calling upon a variable that doesn't have a value or can't be executed because it's missing information or input data, or it's going to be any kind of syntax error. So you've written your logic, but there is a gap in your logic. There's something that should happen that you haven't thought of, or you skipped a step, or you are manipulating data in a way that makes it unusable for another function down in the chain. So all of these things are things that we have to keep in mind. All right. And then finally, we'll talk about where it makes sense to be using AI and where it does not, right? So we spoke about data models, or arrays and objects. And if you have information that you want to handle, right? And then instead of going out and looking into what are all of the methods that I can use for an array and how do these work, how do I navigate that, and playing around with it potentially for hours and trying to get the data that you need and trying to validate that information. This becomes a very good case for using AI within your code editor to be like, okay, I have an array, I want to do this with it, then I want to do that with it because I'm looking for that kind of output. And then it will create that logic for you. Again, it's very important for you to go through it. Make sure that it does indeed deliver what you expect it to by just console logging your information or debug logging that information to the console, and making sure that at every step it is taking in the right information, extracting the right information, outputting the right information, and not just let it do its thing and you're like, okay, I believe what it gave me and it's going to be great, right? So if we're going to take that metaphor, right, and we're going to look into utilizing all of these functionalities within an app. So let's start, because at the end of the day, I'm just looking for if I have the page here, sorry. No, I have it here, right? So this is something that I built in the beginning for the demo, and also like mostly to show the difference between HTML only and then HTML with CSS, right? So where with HTML it was like just a whole bunch of text that was not readable, and then you have all of this with the power of CSS. Now, this also has the power of JavaScript, but because there's no backend, the functionality is very limited for reasons that we'll cover in a bit. But let's go through an exercise of building this out, and then looking at what is generated for us and how we can utilize that. Because in the next session, we will be comparing the different tools that you have at your disposal. So when we're going to be using AI, where to use it, which models to use, the code editor that we'll be using or that you can use at the end of the day. It's up to you kind of what you prefer, but also the cost that comes into play. Because at the end of the day, it's some of it is free, some of it isn't. But if you're going to be building an application, you want to use a tool that is good, that's powerful, that's somewhat fast, and that is reliable, and that you can keep using as your application grows. And we're going to be putting a lot of rules in place for AI. We're going to be putting a lot of kind of guardrails for what we want it and don't want it, what we don't want it to do. But this is something that we'll cover in the next session because it's kind of a broad topic, and we really need to spend some time on it before we start settling into our tech stack and actually building the app. So let's do that. All right, sorry, just checking out the stream, checking the audio. We are good to go. So let me all right, just give me a second. One moment. Okay. Later. All right. Sorry. I just wanted to set up a new environment so that we don't have too many things in our board, right? Okay, so if we're looking, so again, we are working at the moment in Visual Studio Code, very out of the box configuration. All that I've done here is just simply log in with my GitHub account, and we'll be going through setting up a GitHub account and getting everything up and running very soon. This is something that you can already do, but we're going to do this all as well in the next session just to make sure that you're ready for whenever we're going to be building as well as deploying our app periodically to make sure that we build it gradually. So when we are building our application, there are many different ways for us to start. For now, we're just going to be doing something very basic because we just want to build something and go through the code that it generates just to show that whatever we have covered so far will give us most of the information that we need to start building, right? Because you're going to be recognizing most of the things that it will generate, right? So we're going to be, we can start in ask mode. We can start in agent mode. For the moment, I'm just going to start in agent mode because what we're building is really simple, and I don't expect that it will be difficult for AI to generate for us what we need. So I'm going to describe what I want, and I'm going to firstly tell it what I want in terms of technology, right? So I want to build a Kanban board similar to Trello, right? So this is the app that I'm trying to mimic the functionality of, right? I would like to build this app using plain, right? I can call it vanilla, which I'm just calling it plain, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? I want the following functionality to be in place. Do also add comments for context while building the app. Functionality. So 3. Okay, so I want to have okay. Let me not define that. So what I want is input field for new task. Okay, I just want to kind of specify things so that I know that it will like use certain browser functionalities. Setting a date in the future could put it in the backlog queue. Anything for today will go in the in progress queue. Anything in the past will automatically go in the done queue, right? Now at the moment we haven't really talked much about storage of information, just because that's where the backend will come in, and we haven't really gotten there yet. So for now, I'm assuming that it will store that information in the browser. So in your session, so when we have the page open, whatever we do there will be stored within that session itself, but it won't be stored anywhere else for the moment. So I'm just going to ask it how it's going to handle that, and whether it can advise us in a way that we can preserve that information across sessions. Can you also tell me how the information will be stored, as we don't have a backend at the moment? And can we store this information in a file, for example? All right. Now this is again, it is broad, but it's relatively precise in what information and what kind of functionality that I'm looking for. And because I'm telling it to not use any framework at the moment, so I'm just telling it to use plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, this should not result in more than 3 files that will do the functionality that I'm looking for. So we're gonna submit this request and let's see what it comes back with. All right. All right. It's like, okay, this is, you want to create new tasks. So there will be a input for a name, which is obvious. A date picker. It's because I told it, okay, I want you to do something with the dates, right? So if the date is in the past, go to backlog, in progress and done. A button to add the task. All right. Very logical stuff. And then the queues, right? So the columns. It's going to take the information that I've already given it, right? So it will only create the backlog, in progress and done. It's not going to create more columns because I didn't specify any, which is fine for now. And then task sorting. So when a task is added, JavaScript checks the date, right? Again, because we do need that logic, and then place it in the correct column, right? So without JavaScript, we can't do this. So there is no sorting if there's no JavaScript. If there is just HTML and CSS, I would have to create the task in the queue in which I want it to belong, and that's it. And then data storage. So it's like, okay, since there is no backend, right? You can use the browser's local storage, which is what I already said. So it will persist the tasks, keeping the data even after the page is reloaded, which is fine, but we're still in that same session. But it's not in a file and is only accessible in the browser, right? So storing it in a file, okay. It says, okay, plain HTML, just you cannot write to a file on disk for security reasons. You can, however, offer an export button that lets users download their tasks as a JSON file and import button to load it. Okay, so it's going to be like, okay, I will scaffold the basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for you for your Kanban board with comments for clarity. Would you like me to create the initial files and code for you? I'm going to tell it, yes, please go ahead. And also add the export and import JSON functionality. Yeah, enough. All right. So the agent, okay, or the model itself, I have a folder open here, right? So because I'm using the agent mode, it's going to create the files for me automatically. So I don't need to create these files. And as you can see, it created index.html, which we already established is going to be the primary page of your application as per the standards of the browser. And it will show me here, it will kind of run me through what it's doing bit by bit. This is something that we'll get used to quite soon. And you can also see that, okay, it has created 3 files. Everything that it changed is highlighted in green so that I can, because if this is a large code base, so this is a project that I'm already working on, which we'll see in a bit for sure. So everything is, as you can see here, is green. But what's important now is for us to like go through it and just kind of confirm that everything that is here is something that we already recognize. So HTML, again, is very simple, right? We have the HTML like heading. We already know that it generates that by default. We have the head. It has automatically given it a title, which is Kanban board. It has automatically also linked the style sheet, right? So it has created a style sheet, just like we did. It created the body and all of its contents. And as you can see, it added the script all the way at the end before the closing tag of the body, right? Because again, the JavaScript here is not important to load before anything else is there, because it only needs to do something once a user actually creates a new item. And the user can't create a new item if the page isn't loaded yet. So there is no point in loading this JavaScript before anything else. Now let's go to CSS. There is not like too much in here, but again, like we have the body, setting the font, setting the background color, which is like white-ish, right? I can change this in here as well. So if I there's no point to ask AI to be like, okay, I want a gray background, for example. I can just go in here and just change it myself without like having to call upon it just to change something that simple for me. We have some containers, so these will be the columns most probably. We have styling for the heading, which is just to put it in the center. We are targeting the form, right? So this is an element selector. We're using display flex by default. We're justifying content to the center. This again to center everything. We're setting a gap. So this is something that we didn't see yet, but this is just to create a gap between rows. Again, when you see something new, it's always good to just hover over it and it will tell you the information. So sorry, just hover over it. And the code editor will tell you what this is and what it should be doing. It even links you to the MDN reference page where you can read all about this like gap property. So we have some margin, we have justify, we have a board that also has display flex. We're using columns, and as you can see, RGBA is here being used, which we covered for the specific coloring, right? So it's black, but there is some transparency. That's why we're using RGBA with a very slight like transparency effect here. But again, fine. It has kind of decided. We didn't give it any specifications in terms of design. We didn't specify any colors. So it just created something, you know, that it thinks will look good. We'll look at the result in a second, and we'll decide for ourselves, right? Now, let me ask you a question. All right. If you look at all of this, are we anywhere looking at making this page work for mobile devices? All right. What are we missing here to do that? Or do we have that already? Okay. Just going to give you a couple of seconds. So the answer is no. We're currently not targeting because otherwise we will have an ad media targeting where we're looking at some kind of display size or pixel density size or whatever, which we currently are not doing. Now, looking at JavaScript. So it's telling us that, okay, we're storing things locally. The structure for our objects is there is an ID, there is a text, there is a date, and the format of the date is year, month, day. We can change that. So this is something that, again, it has kind of chosen for us. If we want to follow a different format, that's something that we can tell it that we want. You can see that it has created a whole bunch of DOM interaction endpoints. So it has created, okay, task form. So this is whenever the task form is being targeted, right? This is task input, the date. So for all of these, we're doing something. And the good thing is about using a proper code editor is that if I double click on any of these, if you look here, this gray little bar here, this means that whatever I've selected is also there, the identical thing. So if I scroll down to where that is, you can see that's also highlighted. So here, this is only being instantiated. So here we're just creating that. And down here is where we're actually using it. So this is called handling submission. That's what it's called it. So we're like, okay, if, okay, this is submitted, we have a function. This function takes a parameter, which is the submitted event itself, which is just here simplified by E for event. And we have, you know, we're saying, okay, this is a text. So this is quite interesting, right? So let's go through this maybe one by one and see what it does. Again, all of this is kind of things that it came up with itself and thought that this is something that's handy for the usability, right? So if the user submits the form, so the task form, right? So the user wants to submit a new form. You click on the button submit. There is a function that is being called, and the parameter is the submitted event itself. And then it's like, okay, we're going to be taking the text, and the input text is being trimmed, and trim removes any kind of spacing. So if a user enters text and leaves a space at the end of that text, the user doesn't expect that space to be there in the task itself. Funny enough, right? So when you enter a text somewhere, you kind of expect for that text to just be the text itself and nothing, right? And even, for example, if the user had pressed space before typing anything, so maybe the user pressed 5 times space before typing the first word, when we trim, we're removing any empty space, any white space at the end and at the start of that text, right? Which is a very good practice to do. So this is, lesson learned, right? And then we have the date. So we're taking the value of it, because the date as submitted by the browser will have multiple, like the data is not just the date, there will be more information. So there is an object of the date itself. And here we're taking the date input value and nothing else, right? And we're also checking if there is no text or there is no date, we're returning. That means we are exiting out of this function and we're not continuing to execute anything here. So we'll continue to the next block. Now, if this if is true, so both of these are valid, right? So we have text and we have date, then we're continuing. Then we're adding a task, right? So this is a function. Again, the function has brackets and has arguments. So this is add task is a function that takes 2 arguments, text and date. And where was this function created? If we double click on it, we can see here. If we scroll up, we can see add task. So here we're creating a function add task. For the function, we're taking 2 parameters. So we're defining the parameters that we're taking, which is text and date. And this is how the function works, right? So we're loading the tasks. For the new task, we're saying, okay, we have this object notation. So for every new task, we have an ID for date now, which is again a browser function or a JavaScript function. So when we say date.now, the browser, which runs in your computer or your mobile device, will get the date from the device itself. So it will get the date from the operating system. And that is the date that will be given here. Then we have text, we have the date. Task.push. Push is an array function to add new data to an existing array. So where is tasks? So tasks is everywhere. But if we look at where it initially was created, that is going to be inside of the load tasks function, which is, I guess, perfectly fine. So we have a constant, we have tasks, which is local storage. So again, this is talking to the browser. So this is in the browser storage, right? And the browser then stores it on your computer. Get items Kanban list. So we're building the task array here. So as the page loads, it's getting this information. And then we're parsing that information to be able to use it further. So just by looking at the code that it generates, we can already learn a whole lot. But at the end of the day, most of it we have already seen. And where we have aspects or things that we have not come across yet, it's very important to look into it. Like hover over a word that you don't know what it does, read a reference, or you can even highlight a bit of code and tell it to explain that further to you. If you're unclear about any part of it or how it works, because at the end of the day, you will come across a lot of blocks of code. So this, I don't know if I have covered the block of code yet. So this is considered a block, a code block, because it's fully self-contained. So we have an if block. So this is just a flow control. But it can be a function, it can be anything else. It starts here, it ends here, right? So there is nothing else here that it can, of course, take information from outside of this block. and have variables that might be used somewhere else. But this is a code block, basically. Because you will come across many code blocks that are written in a way that are very difficult to understand or not self-explanatory, which is in itself kind of a trait for bad written code. Because if it's something that you read and you really can't understand what it does, then it should have been written with like more expressive in a more expressive way, so that for yourself in the future when you read it, that you understand what it did in the time that you decided to do something, or for someone else that might want to look at what you have written and maybe copy it or maybe learn something from it, right? So for now, let's keep everything. So we're just going to say, okay, we're going to keep everything. We're going to take the index, at least the path of the index. And sorry, I'm just again checking my audio, checking that everything is okay. Going back to the browser. No, browser, right. So let's go here. Let's load our page. All right, cool. So this doesn't look amazing, but it's okay. We again like didn't tell it to give us any specific design, and I also want to highlight something here before we continue. We're using so inside of Visual Studio Code, when you log in and you use Copilot, Copilot can use a variety of AI models, right? So it has a few. So it can use Claude, it can use Gemini 2.5 Pro, it uses GPT 4.1 out of the box. It can also use GPT-5. So this is the result that we have. We can also copy the same prompt and give it to a different model and see what it comes up with, which I think is a very cool experiment we can do in a bit. So I'm just going to copy this. And then we're going to give it to GPT-5 afterwards and see how it generates the exact same thing. And also, even if you give it to the same AI model, it might create something different for you, because it has its own way of reasoning and it's not a predetermined thing. So we have the import and export. We don't have data, so let's give it a try. So first, task. So do remember that the date picker, right? So this is a browser function. And because we didn't there is no styling, which to be honest, I expected it to style it somehow, but it didn't. But okay, it is what it is. So when we select this date picker comes from the browser, right? So it's just calling upon like a date picker function, and this is what we get by default. So we're gonna select today, because I want to test all of it. So actually, let's select tomorrow. Let's start with the backlog. So let's say it's gonna be on the 25th, on the Monday. Our task, great. It added it to the backlog. It also added the delete button, which I did not explicitly ask for, but it's quite logical. If you're going to be adding tasks, you might also want to get rid of them, right? So let me add to be deleted. And this will also go somewhere in the future. Add task, great. So if we get rid of this, then it should get rid of it. And all of this is being done by a JavaScript, right? So HTML puts it here on the page, but JavaScript makes it so that we can actually add these and delete them. So for today, so this should go in progress. Add is in progress. Great. Already done. This is going to be yesterday. Okay, great. So all of the core functionality is in place, right? Now it said that we could export this, so let's give it a try. I have a file. Let me open this up. So it got it, and this is a JSON, right? So again, JSON file. Can I make this bigger? No, not on this preview. But let me copy this, and I'll show you that in the code editor. So let's go back. Just gonna temp.d. So I'm just going to put this in here. So this is actually, let me, if I, okay, so, yeah, so that we could get the colors. All right. So this is a structure that it has created, right? Which is quite simple. So for each entry in our database, database array, right? So we have in our JavaScript, we have an array, which is the tasks array. And whenever the page is loaded, it is then load tasks. Okay. So I just want to kind of highlight that because it does refresh the the tasks page, right? For us, which for it's using this function, because if it wouldn't do that, we wouldn't actually be seeing anything here unless we refresh our page. So whenever we are refreshing, it's getting all of the information that is currently stored inside of the browser session and putting all of these items in place. So if we look again at the JSON, it's very simple, right? So it has an ID, and this is being automatically generated. So if we look at the uh, JavaScript and we look for ID specifically, so the ID is the date now. That is what the ID is. So if we go back here, so this is, you might not recognize this. I don't know if you can see a date in here out of the right away, but that is because the date is automatically being generated in epoch time. So if we go to epoch conversion and we enter the value that we're getting, okay, we translate to human date. It's giving us the time in which that specific item was added. So a very, very precise time to the thousandths of the second, right? Now, if you want to read about epoch time and what it is, it's a Unix like timekeeping system that basically started counting and on a specific date, and it's counting in milliseconds. So this is where that number then comes from, and every second that passes, or yeah, actually even every millisecond that passes, it increments, and this is then the number that we are seeing, right? So this is epoch time. The text, which is basically the name, so it just calls it text. I mean, it would have maybe been better called title or something like that. And then we have date, right? Now, this is, of course, very limited, very small. There is currently no way for us to like drag and drop them somewhere. We can't edit them. So in here, we can delete them, but there is no way to like double click on it and do something with it. And this is where like the incremental building of our application will come into play, and where the power of AI will really become evident. Because before we do this, we will most probably want to create some kind of a PRD, which is like a product plan, which we'll be covering in the next session, how to get there, the best ways to kind of define your project before you start building anything. Because using that, we can put in a lot of how do I put it? We can put in a lot of guardrails, and we can already make a lot of decisions before telling AI to build anything, so that we don't reach a point where we are just building on a whim. So this is what people call vibe coding. And then we reach a point where we can't continue because AI made the decision for us somewhere in the beginning that now is very difficult for us to change without rewriting half of our application and maybe breaking the other half. And if that's the way that you're going to do it, you'll most probably be lost with whatever it's creating for you way before you get stuck. And then it's going to be much more difficult to realize what you need to do to fix it, because you have no idea what it has created for you to start with. So for now, let's continue this experiment just a bit, and we're going to get rid of all of this. So we're going to delete these files. Yeah, sure. Great. We're going to start a new chat. We're going to go with GPT-5, and we're going to, oh, sorry. Okay, let's go back. So I just want to take this text out of the last prompt so that I don't have to rewrite it. New chat, GPT-5. We're going to give it the exact same prompt. And okay, it also brought back my file, so I'm just going to get rid of these. Is there anything in here? No, these are empty. Okay. So just delete those. Yeah, put into trash. Perfect. And we're going to submit this. Yeah, sure. So it's a preview build. Everyone has access to it, but you do have to tell it that you want to enable it, which is fine. And the idea is, so considering that this is a major new release, that it would be much smarter, and that it would create something for us that should be more feature rich by default. But let's see. Okay. So doesn't seem to be going well. It's not really a problem that it works for a bit. We'll give it a couple more seconds. If not, then we'll just give it the prompt again. Because most probably after the enabling, I don't think it even submitted the request. So let's stop it. We're going to paste in the same text. We're going to send it, and hopefully you will get a faster response this time. Or not. Okay, great. So it is working on it. It's okay. So it's by default choosing to go with the export import method. The last model did ask us for it, so it suggested it, and we had to tell it that that is what we want to have implemented. This one just assumed that as it's the only viable option, that it should just go ahead and implement that on our behalf. So what we're getting here is very similar to what we had before. Again, just plain HTML, CSS already linked, JavaScript at the end. All right. Okay. So right off the bat, we see that the new, so GPT-5 does a lot more documentation for us. So it explains much more what it has created. So comments in HTML aren't all that important. Let's see the style. So the style is very interesting. It is okay. So it is mostly the same, or at least it's similar but it just didn't use any spacing everywhere, so it's kind of, you know, it's quite long. But okay, we can, there is functionality to automatically make that look better. And if we look at the at the JavaScript, okay, so this functionality does look to be significantly different, which is fine. So again, this is where, you know, learning and looking at what it has created for you and making sure that you understand it becomes very important. But this one did create a very different construct of HTML than the one before it. Which is fine. So also here in the array, we can see that we have ID like we had before, we had title like we had before, we had date, which has the same format, but we also have status, which we didn't have in the other one, which again, we didn't ask for, but here it just assumed that we'll have one. So here we have make ID. So where before the ID of the ticket was just the date now and epoch time, like you saw, this one is using a more sophisticated approach. So it's like, okay, return the date now, then convert that into a string, right? Of a maximum of 36 characters. And then it's saying, okay, also create a random number, and that number is converted into a string with equal length, and then it is slicing them as well. So slice we didn't cover, something that I'll leave up to you to kind of investigate, but you can read about it here if you want in a bit. So again, like you see that this is very, very different. And also here it will be quite interesting to run through this code and read everything that it has created here for you. So again, it has a function to load all of the tasks whenever the browser page is loaded. Get rid of this. So yeah, it's storing it. Okay, yeah. So if it can't store it, it will return. It will parse out the information. Again, this should look familiar, right? So it's trying to do something, try, right? If it succeeded, it continues. If there's an error, it will catch the error here, just E for error. And then it's console logging to say that there is a problem with parsing the stored information. We have the save functionality, determine status. Okay, so let's have a look at it. Let's just keep all of what it has created. Let's get the path. Actually, the path should be the same because it has the same name. All right. This looks different. I can't say that it looks better, but definitely looks different. So we have the title here for the future. Let's pick a date in the future somewhere. Add task. So it says, okay, so reevaluate dates, which is quite interesting. Export. This is for import to choose a file, and clear all, which is also interesting. So add, again, like we didn't ask for this. So we still like don't have a feature to edit. So once it's something in there, we can't edit it. This one also added an auto delete, which does work. And then if we select the date in the future, add task today. Yep, for today, add task. And already done. This is going to be in the past somewhere. Add, good. So reevaluate dates. I'm assuming that it would check the dates for all of them. So if I kept this open, right, and tomorrow I would come back here, then the date obviously isn't correct anymore. So if I set something in the backlog for like tomorrow and it is already tomorrow, then they should shuffle around, which is quite interesting that it added this on its own, which is actually quite clever. So if we look at evaluate, right? So evaluate dates. So it's like, okay, when you click on it, so again, it's an event listener because we do have to actively click the button. It will take the task, it will map them. So it will go through all of the tasks and look at T, so T for time. And then it would basically just check, okay, status from date, and then it will re-evaluate and re-render. So render here is a function that will re-render the page because it's yeah, again, it will, otherwise the page would not refresh and nothing would happen. So that's actually quite interesting. So it will reevaluate the dates and then it will save the tasks again. Interesting. So status from date. Yeah, the function status from date. It's so it's checking that there is a date. Return backlog. Interesting. Good. So clear all, I'm assuming we'll just remove everything. Clear all task. Yeah. So also like this is an alert, right? So when you click clear all, it's using the alert function for the browser, which gives you this message. So if we look for alert, yeah, please enter task. This is a different one. If we look for another alert, yeah, so there are quite a few. So also you see that it does some error handling for us whenever things happen. And then if we look for clear all, then here's like, okay, clear all tasks. Yeah. Yeah. So it's a ask for a confirmation. Interesting. Great. So let's do that. Okay. Now they're gone. Again, not beautiful. Also, it did add here some kind of explanation on how it works, which is also quite interesting. So tasks are automatically placed based on the selected date. So future goes to backlog, today, in progress, past, done, which is also quite handy to tell your users. So if someone is here, that at least they know how this works. Again, it is quite disappointing that GPT doesn't seem to do anything in terms of design. So let's just copy this one more time and get rid of all of this. Delete. Sure. And start a new chat. For this time, let's go with okay, so Gemini or Claude Sonnet 3.5. 3.5. Okay, let's do Claude. Paste in the same prompt. Go. All right. So it didn't address yet our issue of backing up or like keeping information over time. It's like, okay, we'll get to that later, which is fine. And it just started with creating our index, our CSS, which is, I mean, all very straightforward. Again, the CSS automatically added, the JavaScript also automatically added. And I'm very keen to see whether there will be any kind of particular style that will be chosen. Okay, so what is it asking? So it says, okay, lastly, data storage. The application is local storage for persistent data. Tasks are stored in JSON, which is the standard. Fine. Each task has a unique ID, text content, and due date. There's task management. That's great. How to use, enter task. Okay. Now, data stored in the browser. Okay, which means data persistence over persistence even after closing the browser. data is limited to the same browser and device. Okay, which is fine. So if the user would close their browser, reopen it, the data is still there in their browser profile, which is great. A storage limit. So this is also quite interesting. So it's giving us more context. Storage limit is around 5 to 10 megabytes, depending on the browser, right? So this is what it's allowed by the operating system to have for a browser session. If you want to store information in a file instead of local storage, we would, set up a simple backend server. We'll get to that later. Create a JSON file to store the task, create API endpoint to read write to this file. Okay, good. So let's leave the files for now. I just want to see how this looks like and see whether there is any. Actually, I don't even need to copy that. Refresh. Okay, so Claude 3.5 did automatically create at least a little bit of styling, which is still better than what we had before. Similar functionality, but as you can see, GPT-5 did provide more functionality out of the box. It did some explanation to the user. It added the clear all. It added the data evaluation, which is all really great. So it kind of thought more about the application that we're trying to create, and it added some good quality of life features for the user out of the box. So we just want to make sure that this works. So okay, this is actually quite interesting. So why can't I select the date in the past? Okay. So let's select one in the future, I guess. And that goes in the backlog. So today, that is fine. But then, okay, so we can't select the date in the past. So that means that we can't have anything that's already done, which is against what we asked. So interesting. So it put a limit on the date that we can select based on which date it currently is. So for some reason, it's not allowing us to go in the past. So if we go to the JavaScript part, and it didn't really comment a whole lot, which is quite surprising, to be honest. So it did like very minimal commenting. So the tasks, it's like, okay, we have a date and we have date. Okay. So I'm guessing that the output of date is just today. This is why it's not allowing us to create anything before then. Interesting. Because if we look at things that are done, right? So done tasks. I'm just trying to see if I can find where it's limiting the date input. Interesting. Date. So date now, math random. So it's also creating, like using something here that is deprecated, which is not great. The deprecated is a functionality in JavaScript that has now been abandoned and replaced with something different. Okay, so again, different result, not a great result, to be honest, even though there is a bit of a design, but functionality wise, and again, like we didn't choose to style anything, right? So we didn't we didn't give it a picture to say, okay, I want you to style it in this kind of way. But okay. Good. So we'll be talking much more about AI next week, where we'll be comparing the various models. You can choose for yourself which one you want to use, but we'll also be looking at the different IDEs that you can use. So this is Visual Studio Code by default, but you can work in Cursor or Windsurf or something else. We'll also be slowly looking at doing a bit more backend, but this is something that will come the week after, because that is a whole topic on its own that we'll have to cover. But for this week, what you would want to do is pick an idea, pick an app. It can be like a small game. It can be something like what I've tried to put together here. Only focus on the front end. So take vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and add functionality to it. So what we did is now very, very limited, right? But think of something that you would want to do. Even introducing functionality like dragging and dropping is something that we currently don't have, right? But in here, so in this Kanban board, I do have that. So there is JavaScript functionality that will allow me to drag and drop, and for this actually to be rewritten to a different table. And this does introduce a lot of logic. So there is quite a lot that needs to happen in the background in order for this to be persistent and to be functional for the user. You see also that there is a count here, for example, for the number of things. There is also like more design and whatnot in here. You don't have to replicate this, so you can choose to do whatever it is that you please. But it's important to just play around with using your Visual Studio Code and Copilot to build something, but also spend some time to look through whatever it generated for you. You can also ask it to, I wouldn't say line per line, but for example, for JavaScript specifically, for it to explain how functions work, to explain how certain calls work. And it's not only that, you can also, if you are in the JavaScript part and you're like, okay, here, let me highlight this, right? So it will automatically show you that this is what it's asking. And I'm like, okay, does this structure somehow limit the date that can be selected, as at the moment I can't select a date in the past, right? And then it will look through whatever I've highlighted. I can also just tell it to look at the JavaScript code in total, but yeah, I don't want that. I want to do that here specifically. Most probably it will look further. So it says, okay, the task class structure itself doesn't limit the date selection. The date limitation is actually coming from the part of the code where the date picker is being put in place. So it's okay, let me remove this limitation so that you can select past dates, all right? So again, this is maybe also good to see here. So you see that, okay, it didn't write any new lines. It deleted 5 lines. If you hover over it, it shows you exactly what it did. And this is also very important because now we've kind of manipulated what was there. And you can see 2 things. So one, here you have a prompt to keep or to undo. So if I didn't like the change that it made, I can just get rid of it. This file also has this symbol, which means that this file has not been saved since that it was last updated or changed, right? So if I would press Control S or Command S, I would save it. But for now, I want to look at the changes that it has made. So there is an event listener for content loading, right? And the event board function is here being called. So there is a limit. So here, so this was in the code. Even commented set minimum date picker to today. Now it shouldn't have done that because we already told it that if we select the date in the past, that it should put it in the done. But for some reason, it thought that this was a good idea. Again, this just shows that AI models are by no means perfect. So they will do a lot of things that you'll be like, yeah, but didn't I ask you that this is something that I didn't want? But again, they go away and they reason for themselves. And at some point, this model thought that this is something that it needed to add. So what it's doing now is just removing this restriction. So because it says here, date input dot minimum equals today. So anything outside of that can't be selected, which is great if you want for someone to book an appointment and they can't, of course, book an appointment in the past. So this would be great for that. But if I'm saying that, okay, there is a task that I did yesterday, I do want it to be there on my task list, then I should be free to do that. So I'm just gonna click here, keep. I can also hover here and say that, okay, I accept this change. You see that it also automatically has saved the file. So now the marker for an unsaved file is gone. If I like add something in here, you can see that there is a white marker here just above my mouse, which is the non-AI edit. So anything that I have done myself that is editing the file will basically result in that kind of mark to show that it needs to be saved. I've saved it now, so that white marker is now gone. So okay, for this week or the coming week, your focus would be on getting in your code editor, thinking of something that you want to build. Again, just using plain HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and go like slow. Start with the basic functionality and then keep on adding to it, and look at the code that it adds, look at the code that it replaces. And if something is in there that you don't understand at all, just highlight it and ask it to explain what that does or what that piece of code does. Because a lot of these will be repeated. And if you see these often enough, you will quickly understand what these things do, and you'll be able to read the code relatively proficiently. But it does need a little bit of practice. We don't want to spend too much time on that, because as we start building our application and as we start diving into like building more and more of our front end and like bit by bit also adding some backend logic, we will be generating quite a lot of code that we also would have to review to make sure that AI doesn't generate something for us that will eventually get us stuck or bring us in a loop. Because you can easily end up in a scenario where there's an oversight on the behalf of AI, and you have no idea that there is an oversight because you just told it to do something. It made decisions on your behalf, and now you're like, okay, I'm trying to click this button, but it doesn't do X, Y, Z, and it's like, sure, I know what the problem is, and I'll fix it. And then it goes and breaks a whole bunch of things. That you might not understand, but you think that it's doing the right thing, and then if you do that a couple of times, one after the other, then you can basically start from scratch, right? So for now, just play around with it bit by bit. We're not using any frameworks just yet, and then we'll continue with evaluating how best to start, what to use going forward, and why, looking at some cost perspectives that might be of impact in the long run. Something that we need to keep our eye on from this point on going forward. And if you end up making something, just post it in Discord, and let's see what you've come up with. I'm quite interested. And then next week we'll continue with a little bit more JavaScript, but mostly starting to set up our coding environment or development environment so that we can continue with the next stage of our journey, which is looking into the backend and actually starting to build our application. Right? So this will do it for today. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for participating, and I'll see you again next week, same time, same place. Take care, have fun, good luck, and see you then. All right, take care. Bye bye.